I'm so glad you stopped by today because today we are going to be doing our first product review, and I'm also going to be using these products to make a chameleon. I thought it'd be a lot of fun and we'd have a lot of colors to work with. Arteza was nice enough to send me a bunch of art supplies to try out. This isn't sponsored or anything, they just sent me the supplies and wanted to see what I thought about them. But they were nice enough to send me a coupon code for you guys, so if you guys like any of these art supplies and you want 10% off, just type in Bubbly Leaf 1 at checkout and it'll give you 10% off on your purchase. Now this will last until the end of July. Anyways, let's get started on the project. We are going to be making a chameleon, so let's get started. Okay guys, so the first thing that we're going to be working on for our project is going to be sculpting the head for our chameleon. So that means the first product that we're going to try out is going to be the sculpting toolkit. So what I have right here is the pottery and clay sculpting tool set, and it has 42 pieces. So from the first look at this kit, I'm going to say this isn't designed for one specific type of clay project. I think it's kind of set up so you can use it on all types of different types of clay and different things like that. So it's kind of set up with small tools, large tools, medium tools. It's just kind of got a bunch of everything in it. So honestly, I probably won't be using a lot of the larger tools because these are more designed for like pottery wheel and stuff like that. So I'll probably stick with more of the metal and rubber tip tools because I think I'll end up liking those more. Anyways, let's start on our clay head. So I'm going to start with a lump of tinfoil as the base. I'm going to set it down, make sure it's kind of roughly shaped into the shape I want, and we're going to get this completely covered in clay. I'm going to make sure to smooth everything out and get a basic shape laid down, and then we can start adding the features to the face. So the first detail that I'm going to focus on is making the eyes. So I'm going to start out with these little resin half circles, and I'm going to kind of push them into the side of the face. I know these are extremely large and they kind of look comical right now, but we're going to end up covering them completely in clay, and then we're going to kind of poke through a little hole to where the eye can peek through. I figured doing something like this would help me keep the area around the eye nice and round. So after I get those resin pieces in place, I'm going to cover them with a thin layer of clay. I'm going to blend all of that in, and then we're just going to kind of poke through where we want the eye to open up. I'm going to use one of my pointed tools to kind of help pull out the extra clay. That way I don't mess up the eyelid around the eye. It's okay if it gets a little bit messed up because we are going to be sculpting scale details in it, but I don't want to like completely mess it up. After that, we're going to take a strip of clay and we're going to go around the eye with this, and we're going to blend it in. We're going to use this to kind of make the eye look more sunken in. Next, we're going to take one of the rubber tip tools and we're going to mark out where we want the mouth to be. So we're going to kind of lightly scratch into the clay where we want the mouth to go, and then once we know that we like the shape of it and it's nice and even, we can kind of push in a bit more and straighten up that line. Then I'm going to use some of the more smaller tools and I'm going to start defining some scales around the lips. I found that I liked using this rounded tool to make more of a rounded shaped scale, so I just kind of pushed it at the top of the scales for the lips to round them off instead of using another tool to kind of slowly sculpt it. It was just one easy push in and it had a really good shape, so I was happy with it. After I did the scales around the lips, I realized that I wanted the throat to be kind of sticking out a little bit more, so I added some more clay to that and blended it in. And then right now I'm using one of the dotting tools. I think this was the largest size. It was roughly about like 4 or 5 different sizes, and I'm using the largest one and just kind of lightly pushing into the clay to make kind of soft scale marks. I actually found that the dotting tools worked really well for the scale texture of the chameleon, so I ended up using some of the smaller ones around more of the details and stuff like that, and then we also did this to the top of the head. Now for the throat of the chameleon, I realized it kind of had these lines going down it where it made it look kind of wrinkled, so what I did first was I took one of the rubber tip tools and I just kind of made some nice grooves. I made sure they were nice and smooth, and then I took the dotting tool and I went down the grooves in between them to make the scaling texture. Now honestly, I really liked using this kit. It was a lot of fun. I tried out a bunch of different tools that I didn't even use in this project, but I ended up liking them. Half of them I'm pretty happy with. The other half, it felt like they were kind of repeating because they were just variations of the same thing but different sizes, which is good. It works for different people, so I may be fine with just sticking to one size, but someone may like the different sizes and stuff like that. And then of course the larger tools I probably won't use. But again, those are for different types of clay projects or larger projects, which I'm not doing. Other than some of the tools kind of repeating themselves but being slightly different in size, the only other problem I had, well, it wasn't really a problem, I was just kind of curious why one of the rubber tip tools wasn't on a wooden handle like the others. It was on a plastic one and I could actually pull the rubber tips off. But it was kind of weird and it wasn't made as nice as the other tools, and honestly I would have liked if that was also wooden as well, because it feels like that could probably be a useful tool, but it would get a lot of wear and tear because the little rubber pieces popped off the plastic, and I feel like that tool and smaller rubber tip tools that were more rounded would be of more use than some of the repeating tools. Anyways, we have the head for our chameleon all finished, and I'm going to put this in the oven at 275 Fahrenheit for roughly about 45 minutes. And then once it's out of the oven and is cooled to touch, we can start painting it. Okay, so for the painting, we're going to be trying out two of the sets from Arteza. The main one that I'm going to be focusing on is the 60 count premium acrylic set, and this set is huge. There are so many different colors in here, and I can't wait to try and use as many as I can. This is kind of why I wanted to do a chameleon for this project, because I wanted to mess around with all the different colors. I also wanted to do a project that had green in it, mainly to test out the kit, because green is one of those colors that paint just doesn't like to be. For some reason, green pigmented paint is very difficult to work with. I always feel like it's more watered down or thinner, has less pigment in it, or even takes longer to dry and is harder to blend. So I always have to do a lot of layers with green, so I wanted to test out this kit by using that specific color because I know I always have trouble with it. So surprise, surprise, the first colors we're going to use to primer our face are going to be some greens and some yellows. Now right now, because I'm just applying and blending a large amount of paint, I'm not using the tiny little brushes that Arteza gave me, but I'm really excited to use those towards the end when we add our final details to it. So right now I'm just using one of my cheap paint brushes that I like using for large surfaces and blending and stuff, and I'm just kind of covering the whole face in a green paint. Now, I was actually very surprised with how well this paint worked. It just went on beautifully. They had a ton of pigment. I was actually very surprised with this because the paint I normally use is kind of roughly priced around the same as the paint in Arteza's kits, so I didn't really expect a ton of difference, but it was kind of like night and day. I honestly love this paint. So after I got my first layer of green down, I started adding some yellows, some more turquoise type greens, and just kind of messed around with getting the blending in to try and match the colors for my reference. And then after I was done adding some yellow to it, I started adding some orange and reds just to kind of brighten up certain areas where the markings were more of a reddish kind of color. Now at this point I have most of my colors and my blending all done, and now we're going to start adding our details. So I'm going to pull out that brush set that we got from Arteza and we're going to start messing around with these. So this brush set has 15 brushes. They're all basically the same type of brush, but they're different sizes and lengths, but they're all rounded brushes. These brushes are labeled as miniature, so I'm assuming they're for very, very tiny detail, which I don't have any brushes like that, so I'm really interested in trying them out. So what I'm mainly doing right now is I'm taking some black paint and I'm going into the creases of the mouth and the creases around the eyes to create a shadow. So I'm using the small brushes to go into the crack, and then I'm using some of my larger brushes to kind of blend the paint outwards. That way we don't have just a very drastic line. I'm also doing the same thing for the nostril holes, and then I'm going to start going over the scales with different colors to kind of define them a bit more. So I think the main thing that I'm going to be doing right now is kind of defining the red scales that go around the trim of the face, and I'm just going to kind of add a bit more redness to them and brighten them up and probably add some white highlights to them. Now I'm pretty close to finishing the face right now. We just have a little bit more detail to work on, so I'm going to pull out the other acrylic set. So the second acrylic set is their metallic acrylic set, and it's a 36 count. Now I'm actually really excited to use this set because I like using kind of metallic-y, glittery things in my projects, and I want to do a lot more of them now, and now that I have this kit, it'll be a lot of fun to mess around with all the different colors. And so our chameleon already has a ton of colors, so I'm not going to really add any extra colors to it. I'm just going to kind of pick colors that are similar to what we already did, and we're going to kind of go over the face and add a sheen to it. Okay, so I'm really happy with the coloring and how the face came out. I love the paint sets. Can't wait to use them in future projects. So I'm going to let my paint dry. Now, one thing that was kind of cool about this paint is I realized that it dried differently than the paint that I currently use. This dried nice and flat and kind of like a plasticky texture, and what I previously was using kind of dried in a more latex texture, so it was kind of sticky and you could kind of pull it away if you wanted to. So this actually dried in a way where it wasn't as easy to scratch, but because I kind of have the habit of wanting to make sure everything is nice and protected, I still resined over this to protect the paint just to be safe, because I didn't really have any varnishes or anything to go over this, and I still wanted to make sure that the paint didn't get scratched. Okay, so now we're going to start working on the body. So I have my pattern all drawn out, and these are all the different pieces that we're going to need. Now with this pattern, I decided to try and keep it as simple as I could because the body looked a little complicated and I didn't want it to be very difficult. So the body piece along with the tail is one solid piece, and then we have the front legs and the back legs, and then we're going to have some spikes going down the back, just small ones. So I'm going to use this pattern, get all my fabric cut out, and then we're actually going to be painting it with the same paints that we painted the face. So we're basically using the same colors that we used on the face, and now we can try it out on fabric and see how well the fabric handles the paint. So I picked a light baby blue fabric for this. I figured that color would work well with the other colors and kind of blend well with it. It was kind of a neutral color, and I figured it'd at least work well with the greens. So kind of like how we painted the face, we're going to start off with our greens and our turquoise, and we might throw in a darker green just to brighten up the body and make it stand out a bit more, but I'm mainly sticking with the same colors. Now this is where I thought the paint wouldn't work as well because it worked so well on the clay and it was so nice and thick that I thought we'd have trouble with it kind of absorbing into the fabric, but it actually worked really well, and because it's extra pigmented compared to my other paints, it actually took a lot less paint to paint my fabrics than it did beforehand, because usually I used a ton of paint to do the painting on the fabrics, so I tried to not use a whole lot of colors with it, but with this I probably used like half as much paint as I normally do when I paint fabrics, and I used a ton of colors for this. So after I got all the greens laid down, I added some oranges to this, and then I let my fabric dry. Mainly because I didn't want our new colors to blend into these colors, I wanted them to kind of be separate, so I let everything dry and then I started adding paint to the fabric with it being dry. That way it wouldn't blend into the other colors and we could get more defined lines with it. I started adding reds, and we also started adding some blues. Now at this point I was kind of unhappy with how the fabric was looking. All the colors looked beautiful, but for some reason the markings just looked off. I couldn't figure it out, so I kind of stepped aside, and then I decided to take one of the dotting tools from the clay set and I started using it with paint. So I just kind of stuck it in paint and I started dotting little paint spots all over my fabric to try and give it kind of a scaly texture, and it ended up working really well and I actually liked it after that. I don't know why that changed everything, but it looks so much better after adding the dots. Anyways, after that I need to let everything dry and then we can start sewing our body. So the first bit of sewing that we're going to work on is going to be the body, and then we'll work on the legs. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be sewing the belly and the tail, and we're going to leave the back open. So I'm going to take my sewing machine and I'm just going to follow these lines and stop right about at the base of the tail before we get to the back of the lizard. And then after that I cut out the shape of the tail and I flipped everything right side out. Now for the legs, what we're going to be doing is we're going to try and make it where it can grab. I'm not sure if this will end up working out, but I'm going to try and make it where the toes are separated at least. So we have a little divider, and what we're going to do is we're going to sew it to one side, and we're going to do this to all of the feet, and then we're going to take the other part of the leg and we're going to sew it to the other part of the toe. So basically this will split the bottom of the foot off into two sections. And then I'm going to take my sewing machine and I'm going to sew down the front of the legs. We're leaving the back open. Okay, so we have the body done, we have the legs done. Now what we need to do is work on the little spikes that are going to go down the back. So this is where we're going to pull out the felt that we got. So the pack of felt that I got is a 50 count. It has a bunch of different colors, and some of these are even kind of metallic. Now the main difference that I noticed with these is I believe they're kind of starched, so they're nice and stiff. Not completely stiff, they're not the texture of paper or anything, but I like that they hold their shape, because sometimes when I buy certain felts at the craft store, they're very flimsy and you could easily just rip them in half because they're not put together very well. So even though we got all these wonderful colors, I'm only going to be using the red, and we're going to be using it to make some spikes going down the back of the chameleon. So I have a little pattern drawn out, and I'm just going to trace around it and cut it out of the felt. I'd also like to point out that these little tiny spikes would not work very well with looser type felt. So because the felt is kind of starched and stuff, it actually will hold its shape better, and I can get these tiny little creases and stuff. And before, I probably wouldn't have gotten that to work. Okay, so now that we have our spikes cut out, we have all of our fabric pieces ready, we can start putting our chameleon together. So I have a very simple wire frame setup. The only thing different is, like I said with the feet, I'm trying something new. Again, I don't know if these clips will work out. I think I needed to get bigger ones, but I ended up putting little like alligator clips at the end of the wires for the feet. We're going to try and slide these in between the toes so our chameleon can maybe hold on to something. Again, don't know if it will work, but if anything, at worst case, we have it to where the toes are separated and it at least looks nice. So I already have the tail stuffed, and I'm going to run the wire for the tail into it. It's going to take a little bit because of the curling of it, and then we're going to run the wires for the legs through some holes in the fabric body for the legs. Then we're going to take our clay head and we're going to glue it to the wire for the neck. After that's dried, we can take the fabric for the neck and start gluing it around the base of the head. We'll give that a little bit of time to dry, and then we're going to take our little spikes and we're going to start stuffing and closing up our chameleon. So we're closing up the chameleon and adding the spikes at the same time, so while we're sewing the back closed, we're kind of sewing in between the felt. And then after that, we're going to take the fabric for the front legs and the back legs, and we're going to sew those to the body. We can then take our little alligator clips, open them, and try and slide our toes over them. And then after that, the last thing that we need to do is stuff our legs and close up the back of them. Okay guys, so before we finish the video, I did have one other kit from Arteza that I didn't get to use on this project, but I am going to mess around with it and then we're going to use it in a future project. So this is a glitter kit, and it has 54 jars of different colored glitters, and they are all just beautiful. They're very fine, so I think they'll be fun to mess with resin and different things like that. So I'm going to try and mess around with them just a little bit on camera, show you how they look, and then we can finish the video and I can show you our finished chameleon. Now the only thing that I had a problem with this kit was as soon as I opened it, it was covered in glitter. Surprise, surprise. But honestly, that is completely understandable with this much glitter. It just it's super fine, it just gets everywhere, so I was not surprised that there was glitter outside of the jars. It wasn't a lot, it was just like a fine dust of random glitter colors all over the thing. Anyways, I'm going to be using this to make another project, so keep an eye out for that video. Guys, and that's how I made a chameleon. I had a lot of fun with the new art supplies, and I can't wait to use them on future projects. Don't forget the coupon code if you want to buy anything. I'll have it in the description. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all that fun stuff, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!